I'm Chris from Make Everything, and today we're going to make a side table out of a slice of a log. So a few weeks ago, we decided to take my new Husqvarna 3120 XP and give it a shot on some of these 28-inch oak logs that I had. So here's my friend Mike cutting up a cookie off of that log, and that one had a pretty big split in it, so we cut another one. These are red oak logs. They're the same ones that I tried out my chainsaw mill on when I set that up. So once we had these cut, I stickered them and left them out in the yard for about 3 weeks, and then I drew it up. So I sketched out this table using the log and sort of just approximate dimensions. I knew I wanted it to be 24 inches high and about 18 to 20 inches wide at the base. Pretty rough. It's a quick and dirty assembly for me. So here I am just pulling one of these logs off the pile, and again I wanted something that wasn't going to have a big major split in it, and these sat out to dry for about 3 weeks, so any of the major cracking had already happened. These logs had been outside for a number of years before I cut them, so the bark was pretty soft and a little rotted, so I just chipped it off with a hatchet. Anything that was soft and was just going to disintegrate, I figured I would just remove. It wound up making for a pretty cool finished product because I raised the grain with a wire wheel, as you see, and it makes it look pretty volcanic. Some of the bark was a little stiff, but I went through it a few times and made sure I got everything that was loose off of it. Now I'm just taking a brass wire wheel on a angle grinder to take some of that loose fibers off, and made for a really nice look. It raised the grain in a way that it made the side of the log look kind of like the side of a mountain or a volcano. And you'll see I'm using a battery-powered grinder here, and then I'll switch to a corded one. The low power grinders are good for this application. This is a very inexpensive Harbor Freight grinder I'm using now. I like to use these cheap grinders or a battery grinder because something like this, you can really have the grinder run away on you. And if the grinder is sort of not that strong, you have a better chance of holding on to it if it grabs the wood. You know, if you use a really strong, high-quality grinder, if it wants to run away, it's going to run. So once I was done with all that, this is a Porter cable restorer. It's a great little tool I got from Lowe's. I've found that this takes down wood faster than anything else I own, even faster than a belt sander. So I'm just taking down some of the heavy saw marks that are in the top of this cookie. It's pretty parallel and flat, so all I have to do is just basically sand it down to the point where I'm happy with it. And I left some of the deep saw marks because I like the way they look. So once I'm done with the restorer, I switch over to a Festool sander that I have and just kind of bring the surface down just to a little bit finer of a finish. Whenever I can work outside on something dusty like this, I choose to. I have dust collection in the shop, and that's great, but I like to keep as much dust as I can out of my lungs, and even with my dust collection, some still lingers in the shop, so I do as much sanding and grinding as I can do outside if the weather's good. So at this point, the top is nice and sanded to a point where I like it, and it's time to start working on the base. For the base material, I chose to use 1/4 inch by 1 inch flat stock as the frame that attaches to the log, and 1 inch by 1 inch square stock for the legs. and then I'll attach the legs with a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch square stock that will create an X pattern in between the legs. So here I'm cutting and grinding the 1/4 inch thick by 1 inch wide steel material. This is a good little trick for squaring up stock. I create a perfectly 90-degree reference on one axis, and then I check it on the other axis. So I know that if I put a piece of material up against that aluminum block, I'm going to get a perfectly square edge against the grinder. So here I am just squaring up the 1/4 inch by 1 inch flat stock. And here I am just tacking everything in place. I use that little angle block because I know it's square. This gives me nice square corners. And I check everything square by checking the angles, making sure that the square is the same length in both directions. And then I just finish weld everything with a good heavy bead. Here I'm grinding away the welds. Again, I'm using a cordless grinder. A lot of people think it's weird to use a cordless grinder in a shop. I got plenty of power here. But on an application like this, it's easy to use, it's handheld, and if something goes wrong and it tries to run away, it can't, because it really just doesn't have the power to get out of your hands. Once I measure the thickness of the log, I decided the length of the legs was going to be about 18 inches. So here I am just cutting the 1x1 stock down. I'm just giving myself an idea of what it's going to look like and laying out a flat line on them so that I can square them all up to be exactly the same length so the table will sit flat. Again, I'm using that parallel that I set up on my grinder to keep everything nice and flat, and there's a water bucket underneath it which catches all the sparks. Here I am just laying out the legs, making sure they're square before I weld them. And I tack these and check them for square, and this one warped a little bit, so I had to cut the weld and bend it back, weld it back into place. So now that I got the 4 legs welded in place, I decided what I was going to do for the cross bracing. I wanted something to keep it sturdy and just to add a decorative look. I have this is 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch square stock, and I believe I said 1/4 by 1/4 earlier, but it's 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch square stock, and I just use that piece of scrap steel as a ledge to sit it on. I'm not doing this in any particular drawing, I'm just sort of figuring it out as I go, so I made sure that they were both the same height and tacked them in. And then I went ahead and put one in the opposite direction. Use a little clamp to hold it, but eventually I wound up just using this aluminum block to give me the same height. It left a little gap in between the 2 diagonal braces, but I thought it looked kind of nice in the end that they weren't welded together and blended. Just checking the way it fit up. Now I'll just flip the slice onto it, make sure it sits flat, looks good, mark the bottom. Now that I know it's going to work out right, I just finish weld everything, give a nice penetrating weld so that everything stays nice and strong, and then grind it all back. While I'm doing this welding, I have a fume extractor that's running, which helps a little bit with the fine particles of dust and metal shavings that are floating in the air. Also, you always want to be wearing safety glasses and a respirator when you're grinding metal inside. So now that I got the base all ground and welded, I drilled some holes in it to mount it to the bottom of the slab. I'm using these 1.5-inch galvanized screws. They're a little smaller than the holes that I drilled, and that's intentional so that if the log wants to move around, it doesn't just break the heads of the screws off. They can basically move around inside those holes. My floor isn't very level in the shop, but I know all the legs are the same length, and with a little bit of moving around at the table, it sits perfectly flat. And now's the best part, finishing up with some oil. This actually is going to live outside, so I just put the mineral oil on it to darken it up a little bit and try to protect it. I was originally going to varnish the whole thing, but the mineral oil is a little more natural of a finish. It's food safe, and I just like the way that it looks, and I like that it doesn't have any smell, and I can put it on in the shop without smelling it for a week. Filling in all this raised grain on the sides was kind of challenging. I wound up basically pouring it on while I spread it in with a paintbrush. And after I went around the whole thing, I went around it twice. It came out pretty nice. I'll put a couple of coats of oil on this whole thing just because it's the end grain, so it's going to suck in a lot of oil. So once the oil sort of dries and I wipe off the excess, this is pretty much done. I chose not to do any finish on the base. You know, it's going to live outside, it's going to crack, it's going to wear. I just wanted something that I could put out on my porch and would look nice, or put out in the yard. And I'm happy with how it came out. I like the way the cross base looks with the cracks in the top of the slab. So here it is outside. Thanks for watching this video. Again, my name is Chris from Make Everything. If you liked it, please like my video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos like this. I'm trying to put a lot of stuff together. I'm always working on projects in the shop, and I want to share them with you. If you want to see some behind the scenes photos and videos from the shop, follow @MakeEverythingShop on Instagram, and hope to see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.